It'd be interesting to talk a little bit about the mining or the using of water resources as a whole, and what kind of just like what is water something that's becoming more scarce, or is it something that's abundant? Like what, how does water impact the world energy wise, other than the basics of getting a glass of water or drinking a bottled water or whatever?
Well, definitely in the US, we've kind of gone we've gone into, I would say, more drought-prone areas in recent years. And especially in the middle of the United States, there's kind of like a whole aquifer system that runs basically around like Western Oklahoma down to Western Texas and all throughout kind of the plain states. And that's dropped dramatically. So um, I I don't have exact statistics, but I was reading some of the stuff recently with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, some of their documents, and it was, it was interesting, really kind of like seeing seeing a lot of before and after pictures, how basically the dropping of the water table has affected plant life on the surface. Uh, I think that we've really taken ample water resources for granted a lot, and in recent years there's been a lot of development on this, but I think a lot of companies are seeing their ability to access water at an affordable rate for their operations, and also just generally access long term is really a potential like risk, like kind of, like a financial risk would be. Environmental water risks are a big thing too. So you've seen like companies all over the United States and all over the world take a lot more steps in to recycle and reuse, or basically try to limit their access to kind of like the generalized water infrastructure. So for instance, that would be like a company, say that there was a company in our city that used a lot of water in their processes. They might build a actual reuse plant in their actual operations, where in the past they might just pull water from the pipes, the same pipes that you and I drink, use that in their operations, treat it a little bit so it can go into the water sewer waste system, and just let that free. So
So, with that being said, some of the things that we've talked about previously were how nuclear power might be a reasonable kind of replacement for oil and gas. And I believe in some of your notes that you've put before that hydrogen. Okay, I guess I'm mixing it up in my mind. I'm thinking hydrogen as in automatically water, but the hydrogen doesn't necessarily. So we'll come back to that at another time. Um,
well,
so,
it is a little bit a factor in that, I
okay.
would say, because if you think about like a future, if what a lot of people are thinking as being the replacement fuel for oil and gas, potentially it being hydrogen, there's kind of a couple ways that you can make it, namely converting it from natural gas into hydrogen, or doing a method where you use electricity and basically water to create hydrogen. So in areas like we live in, where water is more scarce than, for instance, a coastal state or a coastal city, where they can basically take the water from the ocean, desalinate it, so pull out the salt and the impurities and have fresh water, it kind of limits our production of hydrogen here in the state of Oklahoma to more hydrogen that might be converted from natural gas. So in a industry of the future with hydrogen, like I see one of the the big opportunities to create hydrogen as these kind of like dual use desal and electricity generation facilities, whether that be electricity generated by renewables, so solar, wind, or nuclear, something like that,
Hmm.
built side by side. So you basically have a plant on the water that pulls out resources from the ocean, uses part of the energy to process it, and then also converts it to hydrogen on site.
But isn't coastal property already pretty expensive? I mean, I'm just imagining that Miami Beach and various beaches all across California and stuff are just going to get littered with all these companies.
Well, you probably wouldn't do it. Um, like, well, so basically everything in energy and minerals and commodities is kind of like an economics game. So it's like how much is is the benefit or value that you're creating versus like cost. So literally it's an equation. And if you're talking about building a next, like the next fuel source in a, renewable fashion, like I see that's going to be very economical. Like there's a hydrogen plant, for instance, in California that's right by pretty close to the sea, and they take basically cow poop and other animal poop that's trucked to this plant, like in Long Beach, and from all over the state, and then they use it on that site to create basically fertilizer as part of the offshoot. They create hydrogen, and then they create excess water. So
Wow.
there's a lot of different technologies where you can take, excuse my French, but take shit, like literally and figuratively,
Right.
and turn it into energy.
Okay. So, do they have those kinds of companies here in the South Central U.S. or like kind of a little bit north of us with like Kansas and Nebraska and Colorado? Because I mean, there's a lot of cattle land in this area, and that alone just seems like it would be a tremendous resource. I mean, literally Oklahoma and Texas specifically, with the amount of cattle that we have, we could take a lot of poop and translate it to resources.
Well, there's a lot of methane capture facilities, and a lot of these are more smaller scale. But the Department of Agriculture has a program where I think they contribute up to $250,000 for farmers, agricultural entities, and I think it might even go over to food processors to install these units, which capture methane and then add towards energy towards the plant. So in some cases, this might pay up to basically 50% of your cost for it. I know, for instance, Frito-Lay has multiple facilities where they take their excess potato chip waste and essentially ferment that, and then use that to capture that the energy and heat off of that, and use that to run a lot of their operations.
So funny, I don't feel like a Dorito right
Huh.
now.
Yeah.
um, so do you know offhand like how much of salt water, going back to the water thing, how much salt is in the salt water, like percentage wise?
I don't know exactly that, and I think it really depends too where you're taking the water from.
Because
Um,
I could just see Disney. I say this kind of jokingly, but also seriously. You know, if they made some of these things specifically, these plants that take out the salt and then use the water for various things, they could have like a little salt plains area, similar to the Last Jedi movie, and it'd be like a really cool little park where you could actually be in a salt plain area, and it's just
that's funny.
completely made out of water
Yeah,
or full salt water.
like a ride.
Yeah, yeah, and it'd be actually out in the middle of the ocean kind of thing, so we wouldn't have to take up more space.
That's hilarious.
um,
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I've actually developed a desalination plant before.
Oh, wow.
And through the process, we did it at a marina, but through the process, what you're usually letting out and returning to the ecosystem is kind of like a briny water. So it's like concentrated salt water. But so it's not usually pure salt. Like pure salt would have to likely go through a heating or evaporation process to get it out.
Gotcha. So that kind of makes me wonder. I know it's not necessarily on our notes and stuff, but can salt be used for any way to help energy one way or the other? Because it seems like we have an abundance of sodium in a lot of different areas, and it would seem like if we could find a way to use it, even if it wasn't cost effective, or not cost effective, but even if it used up a lot of salt,
Yeah.
it would still ultimately be a good thing.
Well, so like Tesla, for instance, does have saltwater based batteries that they use. And it's there's a lot of different applications for using salt in the energy process.
Oh,
But
okay.
it's really kind of developing more. I don't I'm trying to think if like I can't necessarily think off the top of my head if a desalination output of salt brine could necessarily be used in kind of a scalable way to create energy. But it's I I think part of the reason why I talked about that is because it's so plentiful. So if we're gonna like pull out at an industrial scale water from the aquifers here in Oklahoma, for instance, that's going to proportionally, draw those down a lot, the freshwater resources. While if you're on the coast, it's kind of unlimited access. So I really do think that it's one of the biggest commodities of the future, and something that especially landlocked states need to be concerned about is where your water is going to come from. So
Right.
in the way that gas and oil and other commodities are shipped all over the United States in pipelines, I do think that in the future, we're really going to have to find some way to implement a water pipeline system throughout the US. So there's companies, for instance, in the oil and gas industry, there's Solaris Field Solutions. They run a water pipeline, produced water pipeline throughout New Mexico, and I think part of Texas too, West Texas, that carries around water for completion operations. And they also do a lot of water processing. So they do a lot of water handling through that. And that, so New Mexico, I think a year or two ago, their legislature passed a law that was essentially requiring oil and gas companies to reuse water in their operations for completions and such. And that really kind of put a mad dash on operations, I guess, to modernize their ability to reuse rather than pulling for aquifers for using the water, the amounts of water, millions of gallons for fracturing a well and completing a oil and gas well so it's ready to produce. But
So, how have some of the results looked at that now that it's been about a year?
it's just kind of like I feel like the oil and gas and energy industry in a whole is really innovative. So they kind of do what they do until they have to do something else, and that really turned on a dime. So you look at the oil and gas industry specifically compared to 2013, it's so different in so many different ways, from the handling of gas flaring. We talked about ESG last time. There's been a huge focus on using or eliminating the flared gas from well completion operations. So you've seen that utilized in stuff like, for instance, putting basically small units on site that kind of extract that and turn it into usable kind of feedstocks for other industries. And then even they have Bitcoin mining rigs that are kind of in basically a kind of like a container. And that's so like, it's like there was a company, I think, that signed a pretty large contract with ConocoPhillips up in the Bakken recently. And they basically agreed to buy Bakken gas that would otherwise be flared to run their Bitcoin mining operations on site. So it's kind of like dropping off a car there and using it to create all this money, which is kind of a funny thing. Digital currency.